I'm Ken Griffey Jr., Senior, alongside my partner Pedro Alvarez. We're back for a new year of Backyard Baseball.
New year, new me.
2019, the third annual season of Backyard Baseball. There's a lot to talk about.
So much to talk about. Enormous. Huge.
The first thing, of course, is that the league has doubled in size. Went from 7 player managers last year to 14 player managers, enough for 2 leagues, an American League and a National League. There are a lot of new player managers to meet.
That's right. Lots of new faces around the league. We're just going to jump right into it and get started with the American League. We've got Paul McMichael going into his 3rd year as player manager for the A's. Also last year was the reigning league champion.
Juicing.
Averaged a run differential of 11.33 runs in regular season. Secondly, we have Derek Barnhart, the PM for the Bombers, who took a huge L last year in the World Series, losing to the A's, but notably led the league in home runs, with the main star being Pablo Sanchez. We are welcoming into his rookie year Greg Mayer. He's coming out of Indianapolis, Indiana, and will be the PM for the Indians, followed by David Ledbetter, who is entering his sophomore campaign, also from Indianapolis, Indiana. Notably, led the league last year in least batters walked with Curt Schilling. We have Noah Shire coming in. Rookie season out of Eastern PA, will be the PM for the Tigers, followed by Tyler Etter, also in his rookie year, coming out of Columbus, Ohio for the Blue Jays. And lastly, in the American League, we have Jacob McMichael, also in his rookie season out of Cleveland, Ohio for the Devil Rays.
And I know he's definitely one of those last but not least kind of guys.
Yes.
Because I know that Jacob's been talking about being involved in backyard baseball for the past couple seasons, and it just hasn't worked out.
That's right.
Now the pieces have come together.
That's right.
I think Jacob is out for blood.
Stars
personally.
aligned.
Which I just wanted to mention right there when you mentioned Derek Barnhart of the Bombers leading in home runs. The Athletics and the Expos both had 18 home runs on the regular season, 48 home runs for the Bombers. Wow.
You know, I heard that after the season was over, league officials actually had Pablo P in a cup. I don't know what the results were from that. They were not disclosed to the public, but just so we know for this year, there has been some discrepancies in drug testing.
Absolutely. And so then it's my job to talk to you about the National League, first of which is Jordan Helwig of the Expos. This is his 3rd year, characterized by inconsistency throughout both of his past couple seasons, beating the best, losing to the worst, but he's looking forward to his 3rd year for sure. Derek Helwig is back after a brief season of soul searching. He was here for the first season, and now he's back to take on the Colorado Rockies, looking for redemption from a lackluster first season performance. Joel Wasserstein, also known as Wasso, is taking the helm for the Wombats this season. It's a big year for him. He's a bit of a newcomer to backyard baseball, but not to video games. Quite the killer in League of Legends.
I've heard that.
I think he's a missionary kid from Ireland. Could be wrong about that.
I read that on Reddit. Yeah.
Pat Cook in his sophomore campaign as well, now shifting his managerial duties from the Wombats to the Pittsburgh Pirates. He was one of our more consistent player managers last year, and he's looking to take his performance up a notch. Another newcomer, Derek Tincher, who's going to be the manager of the Houston Astros since they were National League when this game was made. He's a big Astros fan now, and now he gets the chance to be at the helm at last. We've got still a couple more. Jeremiah Bennett is a rookie as well. He's going to be the manager of the Blue Fishes. And then I believe that the last player manager would be, drumroll please, Jonah Colvin of the Melonheads. So again, last year, he wasn't so satisfied with his performance.
Right.
And I think he's done a lot more scouting to get ready for draft day next Tuesday. Pretty excited to see what he puts together on the field.
Yeah, very excited for sure. I know a lot of guys last year was their rookie season, and just having that first impression, having that first time around, they are out for blood. They are out to just step on heels to Manny Machado in any way possible.
Absolutely.
To opposing PMs, and I'm all for it.
Absolutely. So let's talk about a little bit of a review from last year. What are some big takeaways from the season last year?
Yeah, I think the first is just seeing the difference in run differentials. Right. We talked about approach from PMs for the draft, whether that was draft approach, whether that was approach if you wanted to steal bags, have the power approach, play stellar defense, whatever that looked like. We saw that play out in run differential. We saw power take precedent. First of all, I think we saw speed also take a second precedent to that as well too. Just an efficiency in bringing runs around the bases. So yeah, that's kind of what my main takeaways are from last year.
Yep. We come away from some of the stats from last year with an average run differential of 7.71 across the league. And then you see the managers who really succeeded being the Bombers and the Athletics. The Bombers posting an average run differential over the regular season of 13.66, and the Athletics with 11.33. And the Monsters, though they fell in the first round, were above league average, but they were the only other team to post above the league average. So you really see a difference between the competitors and then the rest of the field. But I think the one thing we have to discuss is if we're going to play single game mode this season, and you have teams that are just overall tougher, what are we looking at for that magic number? Because I think player managers last year were looking to score 10 runs,
Yep.
and that would put them in a position where they felt they were comfortable. They were probably going to win. They could come away with 10 runs of a run differential in a game. But what number are we talking about this season?
Definitely. That's a great question. You have to understand that the level of how the computer plays against you week by week can affect those head-to-head PM matchups. So that's a good point. I honestly, right now, looking into this season, if it is going to be single game mode, I'm going to guess that number shrinks a little. You know, that the competition will be stiff, but that getting 6, 8 runs as a PM will still solidify that W for you week after week.
I'm going to go on the record right now and say that average run differential across the league, 4. I think 4 would be
Bold prediction.
a solid number between the American League and National Leagues. But again, I think that's because teams are just going to be tougher and our teams are going to be weaker since every player is going to be drafted. Let's talk about players.
Let's talk about
Let's
players.
talk about some of the players we think are going to perform at a high level this year and the players that we think are going to be hot topics come draft time. Yeah,
Sure, yeah, some of those breakout players, right? Like, who's that going to look like?
exactly.
All right, why don't you kick us off?
Well, I have a personal soft spot for Tony Delvecchio. I think he's underrated, undervalued by most teams. He's got a cannon for a right arm.
And a nice haircut, too.
Absolutely. And I think that his season is going to be a lot more impactful than it was last season.
Sure.
Yeah, I know that he started, played for the Melonheads last year, the Tony Angela duo for the Melonheads.
Powerhouse.
I don't think it panned out the way that Jonah Colvin and the Melonheads wanted it to.
Definitely.
That's what I got.
I'm going to follow that bold prediction with another bold prediction for Breakout Player of the Year, and Sally Dobbs. I think the last couple of seasons we've seen Sally gone unrecognized in the draft. I think people look at her and don't see her true value. But if you look at her regular season numbers, she carries a lot more power and pop in her bat and speed on the base pass than what the league recognizes. So I think that she'll be an excellent breakout player this year and somebody who we may see rise in her draft stock coming into this third season.
We've talked a little bit about breakout players. Anybody else you want to hit before we talk over under on Big Four?
I think just one more player, too, that stands out is Ahmed Khan. Right? We kind of all know about his power.
Right.
But I think the kid really just possesses a good mental approach to the game, too.
Absolutely.
If we see him play defense, if we see him on the base pass, he makes the right moves and right decisions. Right? He's not hasty on the base pass. He's a good, coachable young kid, and he brings that power to his team when it's needed most.
I think the big part of that approach is his music and the way that is also getting passed down to Amir. I think that in another offseason in the future, maybe 1-2 years ago, 2 years from now, we're going to be having the same conversation about Amir Khan. Absolutely.
I don't disagree.
Yeah. Well, then let's talk about Big Four.
Big Four.
We've been talking about players that have garnered a certain level of notoriety for the way that they absolutely demolish teams year in and year out. We're talking about Pablo Sanchez, Ken Griffey Jr., Pete Wheeler, Sammy Sosa, some of the names that when you talk about Backyard Baseball 2001, those names come to mind. What does their performance look like? What does their draft position look like? Let's talk first about, well, we'll save Pablo. How about we talk about Pete Wheeler?
Okay.
I think that it's worth mentioning that last year Pete Wheeler for the Expos batted in the 860 ballpark there throughout the year, getting a lot of bunt singles and also putting a few over the fence. So if you're talking about on-base plus slugging, this guy is tops. It's huge.
Yeah, I got to agree there. I think that I'm going to go with an over on Pete Wheeler hitting 800 this year. He's got that power, and if you try to pitch around him and you walk him, he's going to beat you on the base pass, right?
Yeah.
He's got a good arm. He's got a good frame. definitely high expectations for him this year.
Sammy Sosa. Now, in my own personal experience in scouting Sammy Sosa, I see the raw power, I see the potential there, but I've also seen inconsistency. I've seen less than the Pablo Sanchez, the Pete Wheeler. So I'm going to say under on his performance. We don't have numbers from his season last season. I know that he played for the Athletics, and that ball club obviously put in a championship bid. But I don't think that it was as much because of Sammy Sosa's ability to hit home runs like he's known for. I think it was more getting innings on the mound. He was the workhorse for that team last year, and then also his arm, which contributed so much on defense, just one of the highest caliber arms on the game.
Definitely, yeah, and I actually heard an inside report that in the offseason his mom switched up his breakfast from Honey Nut Cheerios to Lucky Charms, and I think that's the switch from whole grains to more of a sugar-based cereal will negatively affect him at the plate this year. I think defensively his arm will still be strong, but that change in diet concerns me for just consistency, longevity. So I'm taking the under on him as well, but his arm on defense will still be a valuable asset.
Ken Griffey Jr., he's gone top 3 each of the past 2 years.
Yep,
In fact,
rightfully so.
number 1 overall, year 1. If I'm not mistaken, number 2 overall, year 2. Could be wrong.
No, you're right.
So then what does his performance look like this year, in your mind?
Yeah, third year. I mean, he's really entering that kind of mid-career form, right? He's been playing around these kids. He's considered a veteran in this league. I really think that just having his hat on backwards more often than not is a plus for this kid, right? He's got his mind right. He's going to be a great asset for any team that a PM decides to pick up. Definitely going to go with the over just on performance from last year, whether that means at the plate, whether that means defensively, whether that means on the base pass. And I think he'll go on the first 3 picks this year.
I think I'm going to disagree with you there. I think that Ken Griffey Jr.'s performance has been, it's dependent on whose hands he's in managerially. Year 1 with the Expos, year's okay. He's knocking in the most runs on that team, but he's not hitting the kind of home runs that maybe he was expected to.
Right.
Last year for the Wombats, again, couldn't get him to contribute at even the level Ahmed Khan was on that team. But then you saw him in the All-Star game hit 2 home runs in that game under the management of Derek Barnhart of the Bombers. So I think it's going to depend on who's managing that player, whether you see his full potential unlocked. And I think odds are you don't see him hit with the power numbers that you kind of want from Ken Griffey Jr. I also don't think he goes top 3 this year.
Okay,
But
bold
again,
prediction.
we'll see what happens.
Well, last but not least, we have to talk about him. I know he's kind of the entire talk of the offseason, and we've mentioned the rumors running around about his possible drug use and having those steroids affecting his power numbers last year. What do you think about him this year? Do you think that with all the hype and the talk around that, he sees a decline in performance this year? How do you feel like he performs?
I think you could talk again about the same thing we talked about with Junior, where his performance will vary based on player manager. But I think that in the first couple years of the league, we thought maybe Pablo was overrated if it were possible. So much hype around Pablo, how could he possibly live up to the hype? But then 2 years in a row, we saw his performance match that hype. So I will say over, if it's possible, for Pablo Sanchez. And I think that what we can talk about then is what does his number look like in that free agency portion of the draft?
Yeah.
So Pablo is set to have a baseline salary of $34, the highest paid player in Backyard Baseball League history.
Yeah.
But does he go for 34? How much over 34 does he go for in that free agency round?
Right.
So I personally think you're not going to see him going to go at cost. I don't think he goes for 34. I don't think he goes for 40. I think you're going to see him go for north of 40. And for what it's worth, I think he goes for more in the American League than in the National League with Derek Barnhart of the Bombers having so much more experience with him on his team. I think he wants him back on that squad. But I think he's going to have some bidding to do.
Another bold prediction.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good. Great. Well, those are kind of the big four. Let's transition a little bit into the PM aspect, right? So you talked about how, whether it's the big four, whether it's other players, how their performance is affected by how the PM decides to use them. Let's talk about some of the bigger moves we think we're going to see from PMs this year in the draft and even in free agency.
Yeah. So what we saw last year was, of course, Pablo Sanchez going number 1 overall.
Right.
But then what you saw was generally speed going first. So Ken Griffey Jr. goes 2 overall, but then after that, Pete Wheeler, and then after that, Kenny Lofton, after that, Luann Louis.
Right.
And so, yeah, when you're talking about Kenny Lofton, Luann Louis, by no means power hitters, but their speed put them up in the beginning of the draft. So the big difference this year is, since it's not just a conventional draft, and there's that free agent aspect, and player managers have the opportunity to try to stretch their money over, less high-powered players. Maybe they want to stretch their money to get more middle-of-the-road players as opposed to a few core superstars. What do you see go this year first? I still think it's speed.
Right.
I still think you're going to see speed go early in both drafts.
Sure.
I think that you're talking Pablo Sanchez. I think you're talking Pete Wheeler. I think you're talking Kenny Lofton. That's my personal take on it. But I know that there are player managers who are trying to use free agency to capitalize on others' blind spots.
Definitely.
We'll see what happens.
Yeah, and I think just on the flip side of that, pitching might become an increased caveat this year. And why I say that is because of the single game aspect, right?
Yeah.
If we talk about competition, we talk about the importance of winning just that game versus having the competition roll over a season. I think pitching in that defense might be a little higher value to PMs than it was last year, right? So we talk about individuals who maybe didn't perform as well as they wanted to last year. Maybe those individuals look to save the run differential by playing better defense, and then look for that middle-of-the-road power, middle-of-the-road speed, and try to scrape together runs game by game.
That's worth talking about because in years past, again, the Bombers took the conventional route of trying to hit bombs.
Right.
And the rest of the league didn't think that was going to be possible. They thought that that was unsustainable. They thought that the runs were just not going to come. It was an inconsistent way to win.
Right.
Well, the Bombers made it work for them. They put the team together that could do it. And then you saw coming into this year how there are going to be weaker teams, weaker player manager teams, and then maybe more competitive CPU opponents. I think that the home run approach is as consistent as any because the defenses are getting better. So are you going to be able to hit ground balls and wear out defenses the same way that you were before? I don't know. I don't think so. I think that strategy may be falling a little behind the 8 ball.
Sure.
And I think that the question is now, with every player getting drafted, can you put together a team that's strong enough, that can hit well enough to count on the long ball?
Right. Definitely. I think just the park aspect plays a good piece of that too, right?
Yep.
The Bombers kind of chose their park to be a little hitter friendly to center, right? And picking Steel Stadium last year. I know that was a good caveat, but what if somebody who tries to have more power based on their team ends up getting stuck with a field that's not power conducive, right? That doesn't allow for home runs, that blocks those in. So that also plays a big role into that approach, that strategy for those PMs.
Now, I do feel a little bit bad because we talked a lot about the Bombers.
We have.
And the Bombers didn't win.
No, they did not.
Bottom line, they didn't win.
Huge L.
They had the highest run differential average going into the playoffs.
Right.
And then the Athletics had the team that got them all the way to the end.
Well, let's talk about that for a second. Do you think that is precedent now? Do you think that should communicate to the rest of the PMs how they should draft based on what we saw last year?
I think that it's absolutely the case. I mean, I think that it's hard to replicate what the Athletics do because they are unconventional. They're unconventional in the kinds of moves they make. So
Right.
Paul McMichael is one of the rare PMs who has mid-draft strategies.
Right.
He's got plans A, B, and C for ways he might approach another PM in the middle of a draft, in the middle of free agency.
Yep.
And so in the deal where he sent the Weber twins to the Wombats for Jason Kendall and picks, that was one where I know we talked to the Wombats now Pirates player manager Pat Cook later, and he's going to be wary of something like that happening again. Because even though he may not feel like he got cheated, like he had a bad deal, the Webbers played well for him. He just feels like it all happened so fast.
Yeah.
And then maybe he ended up helping out the Athletics in a way he didn't anticipate.
Right.
So,
Right. Yeah, so I think at the end of the day, some of the bigger moves we'll see are from those guys who maybe didn't perform as well last year, while still seeing a good mix of savvy moves from the more experienced PMs. But that also boils down to who does the research in the offseason. You know, we talk about successful PMs being individuals who know their stuff, who know the players, who know the fields, who know who they want to pick, when they want to pick them. And if you don't prepare appropriately as a PM in those ways, I think you go into draft day already at a disadvantage.
yeah, and I believe that's absolutely the case, and it was proven with Jonah Colvin of the Melonheads last year. He did some research, mostly online, not game tested.
Yep.
So he gathered some intel and then got into the season and realized he could not score runs.
Yep.
And I know that he's working to remedy that now as he's getting into the last week before the draft and the season starts.
Yeah, and speaking of the draft, why don't we go ahead and just cover a little bit of the breakdown of the draft procedure moving into this season?
Right. So there are a lot of questions surrounding that, and the basics is there are two parts. Free agency comes first,
Right.
and then the snake draft comes second.
Yep.
So all the draft order has already been generated, and it's been appended to the league document that was sent out. But we all start with a level playing field. Each of the player managers has $100, and it's essentially an auction at the beginning. So the richest player manager approaches a player, and then other player managers have the opportunity to bid. That player goes to the highest bidder, and then the next richest player manager approaches another player until all of the player managers don't have enough funds to add more players to their roster. So what that boils down to is then you've got each player manager having anywhere between 1 to 5 players possibly on their roster before the start of the draft, before you start round 1 of the draft. So round 1 of the draft isn't going to feel like it has the last couple of years where Pablo Sanchez goes and then Pete Witter or whatever. It's going to feel more third round, fourth round, but it depends on what happens in free agency.
Right, which is why you have to kind of play your variables appropriately, right? Kind of assuming, okay, who's going to go in free agency? We talk about the big names, Pablo, Barry, Pete, Sammy, all those guys, right? You can probably expect with a high percentage of certainty that those guys are going to go in free agency, but the questions are going to be for how much, and then after they're gone, who's going to be left, right?
Yep.
How do you then strategize and plan your picks accordingly with those, like you said, maybe third, fourth round guys that we saw last year, now being the guys that go in the first round this year?
Yep, absolutely. And so the key is going to be finding the players who their skills, their total skills, maybe don't tell the whole tale. Maybe their total skills is relatively low, but really they've got one tool that's a game changer.
Right.
And maybe that's a cheaper way to add that person to your team.
And I think we're all aware of some of the little intricacies with backyard baseball too, whether it's colors, whether it's field, whether it's siblings. There's many other aspects outside of their strict draft data and numbers that can clue you into, okay, where would this person better perform? How can I better utilize this person at my field, right?
And that's what I think is exciting about free agency, because now every player manager has the opportunity to go after who they want.
Right.
Instead of the person in the last draft position having to just wait what's handed to them.
Definitely.
They get to go after what they want. So I think that from there, the important things to remind player managers are that you can make deals now between cash and draft picks. So you can decide to go into free agency with less money if another player manager will agree to give you some draft picks, but that's restricted between the two leagues.
Right.
National League player managers with themselves and American League. Once free agency is over, then money means nothing anymore. So if you have $5 left from your available payroll, it now doesn't have any application. So you want to figure out how to get the most out of your $100 before you move to the draft. And once draft comes, you're drafting players and home field. So there are those 10 rounds that are already built in, but at that point, you've just got to make sure that you walk away with 9 players and home field. And then, again, you can make deals during the during the draft, after the draft, you can make trades between the two leagues with players.
Right.
So if the Bombers and the Expos want to strike up a deal, as long as one team doesn't end up with duplicate players heading into the season, then it's totally possible for there to be two Pablos in the National League, two Pete Wheelers in the American League.
Right.
You've got a host of options
Yeah.
for making your roster as good as it can be. The American League, I'm sure, will be very concerned with what happens in the National League draft. So we're sure to, in some capacity, come back with some type of coverage of everything National League draft here in the coming weeks.
Yes. Thank you for joining us tonight. We've really enjoyed this time together, breaking down this exciting upcoming season of backyard baseball with these two leagues, National League and American League. I'm Pedro Alvarez.
I'm Ken Griffey Jr., Sr.
We look forward to seeing you this year.
Play ball.